Just a quick note before today's show. We have transformed our entire platform to respond to the current crisis and increased our production of both podcast episodes and blogs, but we cannot do so without your support. Please consider making a donation or contributing as a volunteer to support our active engagement at this critical time.
Okay, my name is Han Htoo Khant Paing, and people call me just Han Htoo, and I came from a Burma ordinary middle class family from a small town in central Burma, and my family sells robes for monks, Buddhist monks. And they also sell a wide variety of other products, one of which is books on different topics, mostly books related to Buddhism, Buddha's teachings, and the other books included. So I was born in Yangon, but I moved to Yangon, my hometown, when I was just 1 month old, and I grew up in Yangon. I grew up playing with friends, reading books, and I just lived in Yangon for more than 10 years, I would say. I moved to Yangon when I was 14, and but I moved alone. I stayed together with my relatives in Yangon, and I passed my matriculation exam, and I, after that, joined the Yangon University of Economics. And in first year, just since the first year, I joined the student union there, Yangon University of Economics Student Union, and I became a quite active member of the union, and I participated in a lot of social and student-related and political movements by my union, as well as the larger confederation called the University Student Unions. And I worked in different positions, and I ended up being vice president of the union when I was in the final year. I studied management, and working in the student union made me closer to the political circles of the country. One of my uncle was an activist, a student activist back in 1988, and I inherited that activism from my uncle, and I became involved in politics and political activism since I was in my university, and I was also connected with the Yangon School of Political Science, where I studied politics since, I would say, my second year of the university. Then I graduated, and I worked a bit, I think, for a year in the business industry. I was a sales executive for a fashion company. Then I quit it when I found I was a political animal, and what I was supposed to be doing is to studying politics. So I quitted my job, and I joined the Yangon School of Political Science, the YSPS again, and I joined most of their classes, um, and I became more connected with political activists and politicians in Myanmar, as well as political science academics abroad. And I worked for two PhD DPhil candidates at the University of Oxford as their research assistant for more than 1.5 years. And I was fortunate enough to be admitted to the master's to a master's program at Oxford, and I went to Oxford for my master's, and I came back in the COVID crisis, and I finished my master's in Myanmar. Then I worked for the Carter Center as a election observer for the 2020 general elections. Then after the election observation mission, I decided to take a break and look things around and search for what suits for me. Then I applied a position at an NGO, and my first day at that new job was the February 1st, and I have a meeting at 9 in the morning, and these were just orientation meetings of the orientation week. The first week, the entire week, was supposed to make me familiar with the organization and getting to know the people. And at 6 p.m., I was woke up by my girlfriend. She said, "They really did. They did the coup." And I checked on my phone and found it that the relevant leaders, the president, the state councillors, and a number of activists and the other political leaders were arrested.
Yeah, thank you for that. So one of the things I want to go back to in learning a bit more about your background is you mentioned in your university days becoming more involved in political science and politics and connecting with people from past movements in Myanmar. And one of the things that I've observed is that during these 2010 reform periods where the younger generation, which you were part of, Gen Z and such, grew up without this experiential and visceral understanding of how cruel the military was. They'd heard stories, but they grew up in a different time. And so since February 1st, they have unfortunately had to find out through their own experience what their older brothers and sisters and parents, aunts and uncles, grandparents had told them. But this has really come as a terrible, terrible shock and awakening, for nightmare, really, for many of these young activists. However, during these periods of reform, when things were relatively becoming more open, more safe, more free, more modern, you seem like your consciousness was different.
I think people like me were, in some sense, pessimist when we talk about these relatively greater freedom and greater liberalization in any of the aspects of Myanmar's life. So what we were aware of was that the transitional justice was not brought about, and it was even sort of not on the table, off the table, and we were aware of these, and we look at the way ahead, and we looked at the possibilities and impossibilities, how and when we can make even more greater freedom, or absolute, not absolute, if we say anything is not absolute, but if I hope you get a sense of what I'm saying. We were looking at more democracy and more freedom and more liberalization, and less and the potential departure of the reserved domains the military occupied and the old establishment still enjoys. So we were conscious in the sense that we have been pessimist, and we have been looking for the ways, and we enjoy, but we just took the freedom, the partial freedom we enjoyed, as just as a step towards a greater freedom.
Right. So as you reference this kind of pessimism that you had, did you feel in any way like out of place or out of step with your friends and your contemporaries who were more enjoying and waking up to this new kind of society being formed? Did you feel that you carried somewhat of a pessimistic attitude that those around you didn't really understand or adapt?
It was not like I was complaining, and people were so content and happy with the things we had got in those days. It was just that people were just so busy with that the liberalization. So many opportunities came up, and so many things to learn, and our generation, I would say the generation that could be called youth in those 10 years. So we were just so busy with catching up opportunities, trying to be not missed out by the events that are taking place. We were just running, but but still, my cycle who were just like I said, in some sense, pessimist, were looking forward to or discussing things that we are not content with this situation. We cannot let this situation consolidate itself. Um, this is what I had to describe about the social scenario. We were just the young people especially were just so busy because the older generations were not sort of catching up the world and its technology and the new opportunities step by step. They were just these doors were just open abruptly in 2010, and people lived in these opportunities.
So would you say that you were surprised by the coup happening?
I would say so. We talk about that potential, the possibilities. My friends abroad and my friends in Myanmar asked me, and we discussed about these looming threats of the coup, and I have to admit that my answer was that in short, the coup was unlikely. I thought the relationship between the NLD civilian government and the military was just deteriorated by the election results and the alleged fraud by like the fraud alleged by the military regarding the elections process and the constitutional amendment process the NLD initiated in 2019. I just thought that they were just having downtime in terms of their relationships, and the military was raising the tempo unnecessarily. But I didn't think it is a rational move for the military to stage a coup. It was a surprise. On the last night of January, I didn't virtually think about anything related to the coup.
Right. So looking back at it now, and of course we say hindsight is 2020, and you look at historical analysis, there's ways to trace connective lines of future events, knowing on what those events turned out to be that in real time were not as known because there are so many potentialities happening in real time, and only one of them actually turns out. But in looking at how things turned out, that there was a coup, and you look back at the previous years, the previous decade, you reference that you yourself had some concerns about greater liberalization that wasn't taking place. What factors do you see leading to this coup taking, that if certain things had happened a certain way in the last decade, if certain concerns that you had been taken care of, maybe we wouldn't have gotten to this situation? Another way to say this is, if you were able to travel back in time, is there anything that could have been done to prevent this from happening and prevent these conditions from arising?
I don't think so. I hate it, and I hate to hear and experience any bit of the atrocities after the coup had happened. But with these ridiculous calculations and and irrational mindsets of the military, I don't think the coup is. I think the coup is inevitable. Uh, it is not in absolute sense. Of course, we can get around the coup, but all we have to do is just to give up uh, the things we can potentially have, but it is not enough. We also would have to give up the things we have already had and our opportunities politically. Um, it is just like portrayed in these deteriorated relations between the civilian government and the military. The NLD initiated the constitutional amendment process, which I thought was impossible from the start. But they anyway did it, and they failed, and they just held the elections, and they won, and by only by a greater percentage than the last elections in 2015, and the commander in chief, the main outline, was facing the retirement in July 2021, and they just did the coup. I don't think there was anything we can avoid in that process to make the coup not happen. If I were sort of a creator, or if I were the orchestrating the opposition forces against the military, I would have done even more stronger things that the NLD had done in the past several years. They made concessions. They let their value compromised to have a better relationships with the military. So this is my answer.
Right. So, like, what exactly? You mentioned that you would have taken stronger actions if you were in the NLD and not have made some moral compromises. Can you be a little more specific? What moral compromises did they make, and what stronger actions would you have liked to have seen them take?
It is a very simple answer, and too simple answer is just not letting your values compromised. There are tens of politicians who I admire and who I respect in the NLD and the other parties that contested in the elections under the 2008 constitutions. But I would say I am a bit too idealistic. I can afford because I'm young. So I just think any actions that we do under the 2008 constitution is just letting our values compromised. It was I am, in a sense, I feel shitty to say this. I feel, in a sense, happy that the coup happened, because it proved that these compromising ways didn't work. This is my simple answer.
Going back to your work in the 2010s, you had referenced that you were closely associated with a number of previous activists in 88 and 2007, others that had, in previous moments of turmoil, had tried to make changes and push for a more open society. So can you share a little about your relationship with them? What were their views about how things were progressing in 2010s by being close to them, talking to them, learning from them? What did you gain from them at that time? What insight did you see into a period of Burmese history that you weren't necessarily alive or cognizant for?
Yeah. So I was close with these generations, the generations of 1988, 1996, and 2007. Um, these revolutions in 1988, 96, and '07 were just sprang out of student movements. So the lead protesters, the top activist, and the bottom activist, all the activists, not all the activists, of course, uh, are were just student union leaders and members, and so naturally, I was in the student union in those days, and I became associated with these people, and I worked together in sort of protest and petitions campaigns and memorial ceremonies and so on. So from a retrospective point of view, I I don't think we were or they were uh, not able to work toward a meaningful change, a meaningful progress. What we were seeing uh, was just more power transfer to the civilian government, the NLD government, which in itself is a miracle and unimaginable some 7, 8 years ago. But we were just playing in that game, the limited games, and which rules were created by the old establishment, and we just didn't have. These older generations didn't have a domain there where they can work in. Uh, Things were just sort of very activist domains and the former politics. Uh, so I would say none of these were answer to the to to better democracy, equality, democracy, and greater freedom that we all long for. So, so these were the situation of these days, and um, what we really needed is a people's action, social activisms, always united and determined against the arrangement proposed by the old establishment, in which they reserved their interest for eternity.
It seems like that social activism and awareness, if it wasn't taking place in the general populace before February 1st, it seems like it's arisen since.
I would say so, and even more than that, uh, some of, if not all, our values were forgotten in those years, like human rights, absolute freedom of speech. Like you cannot cross the red lines. You can retain your human rights as long as you don't challenge uh, these interests, or like I think the Rohingya crisis is the best example. We just forgot uh, what we struggled for, and these certain values were forgotten.
Right. When you talk about free speech, one of the things that comes to mind that caught my attention, and I've referenced this on other episodes, a few years ago, you might have recalled this if it caught your eye. There was an art exhibition where they were collecting pieces from various local artists to highlight, I think it was for Earth Day, and to highlight pollution. And some local Burmese artist had drawn a painting of the historical Buddha wearing a gas mask, and behind him the city of Yangon that was overwhelmed by the air pollution, to indicate that if the Buddha were to come today to a Buddhist country, he would barely be able to breathe because the pollution had gotten so bad. And the outcry of in general that came from the population was one of fury and rage for the insult that it had been, the insult of depicting the Buddha in this way. And we're calling for, the picture to be immediately banned, to be destroyed, that no one should be able to share it online, and even that the artist himself should be arrested and face penalty for doing this under religious law. And I remember being stunned by this. And if someone feels that this art is offensive or degrading or anything, great. That's an opinion that is very valid to share and very valid to investigate. Speaking as someone who came to Myanmar for meditation, for a reverence of the Buddhist teachings, I am definitely sensitive to hearing about how this figure is portrayed respectfully and everything else. But what struck me was that the discussion over this picture and its possible offensiveness was, the immediate reaction was not one of discussion or debate or intellectual curiosity and trying to sort out, how do we as a society deal with our creative expression combined with our religious faith, or for at least for those that are Buddhist in Myanmar. But the overwhelming reaction was, we need to not talk about this. We need to not see this. This needs to be removed and destroyed immediately. And the artist who did this needs to face consequences for it. This happened just a couple years after the state censor had resigned his position. So it was almost like the state censor resigns his position. There's a freedom of speech in Myanmar. And then many of the Burmese people themselves are decrying that they want some of that freedom of speech that was just allowed taken away. And this, to me, this was very saddening, because my advocacy was not in the justification of why this picture was appropriate, or why it should be shown in public places. My advocacy was, let's talk about this publicly. Let's air these ideas and be able to explore ideas of pollution and religion and respect and everything else. But the immediate reaction was not one of discussion or debate. It was one of the people encouraging a censorship and punishment.
Yes, I remember that story, and I was also saddened by that development and the unfolding, the particular way the issue was unfolded. But I was not surprised. Um, the people were just not ready, I would say, and the politicians and the leading minds were not doing enough to make people ready for for the things to come together with greater freedom of expression, or in general greater freedom. Um, it is better understood with the fact that the people who are alive in Myanmar rarely had any experience of uh, a society, like, unless they want abroad and enjoy the freedom. But these very, very tiny proportion of the people, and only very proportion of these people made their way back to Myanmar. So um, these people in Myanmar, including me, didn't really experience the freedom of expressions, and the consequence is that they were not able to tolerate. They haven't. They were not like trained for democratic tolerance, and um, the politicians were not doing enough, and still, right, the censorship was ended in early 2010s, but still there are popular sentiments which are hidden, but once ignited, it is very combustible, and the politicians, even those who claim to be on the side of democracy and greater freedom, were reluctant, and and they were like, before they became parliamentary politicians, they were just citizens. They just grew uh, in these successive dictatorships, and they were just not ready how to op- optimally mediate the situation, and and calm things down on the one hand, and let the good things. Then, on the other hand, they were just not ready for that. Even some, I would say, intrinsically against these ideas uh, of freedom of expression. One, it compromise the values, the prejudice they hold.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you're hitting on a really important point, differentiating those who had experience outside the country and those who didn't. And going back to the Rohingya crisis, I think this hits on some of the reasons and conditions behind that. And I'd be interested to get your take. My feeling was that those rural Burmese, which make up most of the country, that were taken in by this crisis, it's hard for me to really blame them. They feel like another set of victims. They went from warp speed in terms of having very access to any technology or anything, to suddenly all having smartphones and Facebook news and everything else, and to go, I mean, even in a modern, complicated democracy like ours, we had our own problems with fake news and with Russia's interference and the election of Trump. We had our own problems with that, even with as high as the education and everything is in our own country, and so, and even with the technology not going as fast in Myanmar, and so for much of the rural population, it seems something of a perfect storm in terms of how they were taken in by this and what access they really had outside of the news they were getting to independently verify or critical think about what it was they were hearing. It just came at them in this new form in a way that that seemed to be verified in some way. But for me, the more of the concern and the confusion and even the frustration I had was with the smaller circle of Burmese, and including some of my friends who I knew personally at the time going through this, that spoke English, that had been abroad, that had foreign friends, that knew about foreign websites, knew about different ways to get facts and to check facts. And as this was breaking out, sometimes I'd see on one of their Facebook posts, like, okay, well, there's, everyone's talking about this Rohingya crisis, and let me just tell you what I think about it. And when I'd see that, I'd kind of think, oh, okay, this is a reasonable person. Great. I'm going to check in with them and hear what they have to say, and it's going to be a different take. And every single time it was still fitting into that same narrative and same dynamic. And I was just kind of speechless at this. I really didn't understand how those people who had this greater access to language and culture and information and people and ideas were not utilizing that, and were fitting just as strongly into that narrative. And I think the thing that most upset and confused me was that, on one hand, if one doesn't accept the narrative of who did what to whom and who belongs here and sequence of events and what should happen, okay, that's one thing. We can leave that aside for a moment. But there's still the concept and the reality of human suffering, that there is obvious human suffering that is taking place, and whatever the reasons, there is certainly a human response, let alone a kind of Buddhist compassionate response from many of the people I was speaking to, of simply not wanting to see suffering and feeling sorry and compassionate the suffering is taking place. And even aside from whatever the set of narrative stories being told, even if one agrees to disagree, there can also just be a simple acknowledgement that one doesn't want to see a human suffering like this taking place.
It is an interesting thing you said, that some of these people can be victims in their own ways. And you can just apply that concept too much to understand the people who are accessible and exposed and modern. It is just that like I have had a saying, like there are like plants that there are trees that are planted on your ground, but you can only possibly remove the trees that are above the ground, but not the roots. But the roots also grew. So it is not to understand and forgive and just accept things as normal, but what I would propose is a way to understand the phenomenon, not the people, better. I just think many of them, the middle class or upper middle class people, educated, young, and modern, these people are exposed to the environment, the atmospheres that exercise freedom of expression, freedom of thought. But unless they are conceptually doing it, what I mean is, unless they are not only merely letting the the new values imposed on you, also, unless you are literally pushing hard to take out these roots, you you can still be modern and open-minded in some sense, but in some sense the hypocrisy can be seen. I think this is a way to understand these phenomenon. And like I said, if we use your concept of like the the unexposed or rural people are victims. If we use that concept too much, we can understand what is happening, but not that I can understand and relate and accept it as acceptable.
Yeah, the quote from that really sticks in my mind is I remember reading this report of a farmer in some rural place who had only gotten Facebook in the last year, and he said something that was stunning and revealing and also tragic. It was some quote like, I never had realized that we had a Muslim problem in this country. I had never seen anything to worry about or anything dangerous there, but then when I started reading Facebook and it informed me about what the danger really was, now I understand it, and I'm very thankful that I was able to hear this information. And that quote was just so tragic because this is someone without who it seems has not had great access to technology before and to understanding where the news is coming from and the purpose of that news, and had not had any reason before to have certain thoughts or fears or take actions on those. But through this perfect storm of the information coming on this source, which was all very new, it had manufactured and fabricated in him a feeling that this was coming from some verified source, and therefore he had to respond mentally in some way to what he thought was accurate. And this was very different from those people that I knew that were also hearing the same thing, but had many, many different tools, as well as previous experiences, to be able to be critically minded and engage in different ways that a farmer like this, as he was revealing through his quote, might not have at his disposal.
I think when you were first talking about the farmer, I was thinking that he denies that the atrocities were happening, but it seems to you that it is more of a problem of knowledge. I think the more important and even larger problem is the prejudice and the bias that make you take things seriously. The prejudice make uh, distant in human relations, and the distant in human relations cannot can like have really important effect on how we think of certain events. um, I think the lack of information also make distant in human relations. He cannot really relate, but still prejudice. In my opinion, the prejudice works more predominantly, and This makes people to discard things like unimportant or even annoying to hear.
I want to move on to the coup, to what's been happening since and what your involvement has been. You reference waking up on February 1st morning with the shocking news from your girlfriend, and you also reference the orientation week that you're supposed to have in your company. Of course, everything worked out very, very differently for you and for everyone else. And you had mentioned previously to me that you ended up becoming involved with an organization that came to be known as the Burma Spring Front for Federal Democracy, that was founded together with other student union activist leaders from your student days and for alumni from those who had been concerned about these issues at a prior time. Can you share a bit about what this organization was founded to do and what activities it's been doing since?
Just in 3 hours that I know of the coup was happening, I tested in the group, a messenger group, which was founded to coordinate in the COVID-19 volunteering activities of our student union alumni group. I had a meeting or two, I would say several meetings in the coming several days and weeks with these people, and we organized protest, and we organized some art walks. We arranged a construction ladder and scrape and to draw a huge graffiti under the Minigong crossover, a picture of three finger salute, and we protest the other. We organized other protest activities, and um, we became active, and we organized more and more protest. We connect with the current university student unions who are still in the university, who are still the university students. So we became, as we used to be, a sister organization with the USU, and protest organized protest together with these people. I myself also joined with other groups such as trade union leaders and the GSC and the General Strike Committees of Nationalities, who are founded by ethnic people, ethnic activists. So I joined these other protests too. And when we were on the decline of mass protest, I was aware of something that we really needed to solidify the organization and solidify our action. Uh, so I talked with the prominent members, and they also agree with my idea. And um, the night before I fled Yangon, I spent at a safe house, which was just like an underground headquarters for the BSF to be. I went there, and we founded the BSF together, and I fled Yangon with the responsibilities of foreign relations officer and a fundraiser. and and we continue to organize protests which were not safe and massive anymore, but we still did. And and we also organized a bulletin called Towards. It is called Towards, and it was more relevant. And originally, it was intended for that period, which it has more relevant, where the internet connection was cut off substantially. People across the country, so many people didn't have the internet connection, and the people were not able to update themselves with the activism news, the protest news, and the news about the atrocities committed by the military. So, so we thought what made the protest widespread and contagious in the early days was the spread of information, and we just wanted to make sure the information was flowing enough, and we organized that bulletin. We also issued online, but in these days we printed out and make a booklet, and we distributed at in marketplaces, at the bus stops, so where we thought there could be people who would not have access to the internet back then. So we are still doing that bulletin, but now the internet connection was again substantially but not universally restored, and people can update, but we still have some other features like art corner and poems.
Yeah, so that's really a handful of stuff to take in. There's so much to explore there. You've been quite busy along with everyone you've been working with. The first thing that I want to ask you about is this kind of umbrella unit of bringing these very diverse actors together in some kind of coalition that you're trying, and just to ask about how this went to bring in such diverse groups with perhaps slightly different goals and backgrounds and expectations, and what it was like to find a way to all work together. You're obviously representing students, academics, activists, young activists, but then you're coordinating with factory workers, people from trade unions, also some of the ethnic organizations, non-Bamar, non-Buddhists, that have had a very different and more difficult experience under the Tatmadaw, and didn't really have any break during the 2010s. Also, the Milk Tea Alliance. This is outside of Myanmar, but these are other countries in Southeast Asia that are also pursuing their own freedom, and have their own movement. So these four actors alone. I'm sure there's more than this, but just the students, the trade unions, the Milk Tea Alliance, and the ethnic groups. These four groups are already quite diverse in terms of their background and possibly expectations as well. So what was it like trying to bring them into one umbrella and to find a way to work together and to coordinate and to trust?
So it wasn't necessarily an umbrella organization, but in some sense we can still call these umbrella organizations. So there's a saying in Burmese activism or politics. We work together where we can work together. After the coup, there are so little domains that we cannot agree upon, but a vast majority of domains, actions, and demands, they were just the same, and we have commonalities. We were not identical, but still we could make a harmony out of differences, and in a very simple way, I think this is the way we sorted our different things out, and even in our uh, in the BSF, in the student union cycles, there are huge uh, differences in the perceptions towards the 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 coup, and how to get away from it, the attitude towards the means how to get away from it. But these were in the early days, but soon enough we were able to sort these differences out, and we became very clear that some of the tactics uh, uh, were already off the table. So uh, this would be my answer. Uh, like people were so relatable and united uh, in these days where we work, and like the way you put these umbrella organizations, these general strikes committees.
You spoke a bit ago about one of your motivations and activities early on was information and the role of information, of telling people what has been going on, what is going on, getting that news out there in written form. So if the internet is cut off, this coincides with basically all independent journalism in Myanmar being declared illegal and not having any outlet for any honest reporting except for state run propaganda. One of the guests I spoke to just recently expressed a concern about how one even finds out what the news is at this stage, and talked about, on one hand, you have this state run propaganda that is just spewing out their own version and mistruths of what they want to promote. But then on the other side, you have what she declared as false hopes, that there were a number of people that were engaging in wishful thinking, magical thinking of what could happen, what might happen, what did happen, with certain kinds of interpretations of what it means, and that false hope was playing a really damaging role. Added onto this as well, we've seen more recent examples, and she also expressed this concern of people having potentially inside information about what groups are doing or what's being planned, and going and sharing that confidential information in public areas, either to boost one's own credentials as someone with inside information, or to feed into this hope, whether it's false hope or otherwise, but in the process of doing so, of exposing this, not being careful enough and actually putting people and operations at risk. And so we have this very fast moving dynamic situation of trying to figure out at a very basic level what is happening and what does it mean. And this has this simple goal, this seemingly simple goal has turned out to be much more complicated by these factors. And so, what are your thoughts on these dangers and the need and the means of actually acquiring and sharing real, truthful, authentic information that does not put people in danger?
So first thing first, I don't think the information spread by the military officially through their outlets is not quite a harmful thing, because people just don't believe it. But still there are tons of false information, misinformation, which is spread online. Uh, for some reason, I believe are spread intentionally to create false hope, and the groups who are responsible to that, I would say the first suspect is the military itself, and the other is the scandalous pages on Facebook, which thrives on the engagement and likes, and always struggling to retain these. So these misinformation, ownerless misinformation are really hazardous, and these really create the false hope, and I am pretty much confident that in the years to come, like in 10 years, if I were asked what troubled this spring revolution, I would say one of these troubling factors was exactly the false hope. These make people come and give reasons to come, and not focus on things that need the focus, and not channels the attention, effort, money, time to the things that desperately need these. So these are the dangers of false hopes. It was consumed substantially by older generations, like the generation of my parents, my uncles and aunties. I'm 25, so these people consume these false information, and and it is very shocking for me that even younger generation, not even young, uh, educated, middle class, urban youth, these people also consumed false hopes and false information. Uh, so but these people let uh, these hazardous things go soon enough, but uh, any period uh, was not soon enough. Once you consume it, you trouble the momentum of the things going. So like the very first false information is not that told the people not to go out and protest in the very first day after the coup, for it would make the military to really do the coup, which they have already done. So it was nonsense, but people still believed it, and false hopes, like very obvious and straightforward things. You said UN was coming, the US aircraft carriers are just in the Bay of Bengals. But the other false hopes include things like we are on the very obvious winner's side. All we just need to do is just to have stamina with the CDM people, and if they don't go to work for 2 more weeks, they are done. They mean the military. They are done. So these kind of false hopes, not not super obvious, hard to prove, but still in deep analysis, deep enough analysis, nonsense. So I would say um, these has been hazardous. But the last thing, the third thing you say, um, people saying things just to make good impressions and to make themselves look better and more participatory in the process. I witnessed personally these incidences either online, both online and in the physical war. Uh, but these might have connections with the false hopes, but I cannot really connect um, uh, with it. But it is still harmful in itself. That one thing, they are very harmful for the first person, the very person who leaked that information, whether it is true or not. It is super dangerous to tell things to unnecessary people. I don't mean some people are less important, but people who doesn't need to hear that information. And um, also uh, saying things which are not necessary to be exposed. These put risk first on the first person, the person who leaked these information, and the circuits they are involved in, and the activities the circuits were doing, and potentially, of course, the but distantly to the whole coordinated effort and the general populace, but still distant, but still in a systematic and very impactful ways.
Right. So you have all of these factors making it more difficult to just find out the basic information of what's going on. And of course, the fact that overnight independent journalism has basically been declared illegal and that reporters are at equal risk and quite possibly more risk than the average person. How does one go about getting any real information?
I think it is not super hard to be properly informed and informed enough. It is, I in my opinion, what you all need is just some basic sense of the information consumption online. You just need to be aware of certain things. There are signals that these hazardous information, whether these are true or not, contain. Um, you can have alarm in your head when you find these signals, and you just discard that information. And and from my position, meaning one who is involved in enough, but still not involved in so many domains and so many things happening out there. You also need to control yourself, that you don't need to know all the information, and it is even dangerous to to go for extra miles for the information that you don't necessarily need to know. That is my way of doing things. I just don't ask things if I uh, really if I don't really need. Yes.
Right. Right. So getting back to some of the activities that you've been involved in with the Burma Spring Front and some of the work that you were doing, you mentioned that eventually your activism in this organization got into the crosshairs of the military intelligence unit. Can you share a bit about how you learned that you were being noticed and what happened as a result of that?
Ah, it is not that I explicitly uh, uh, am aware that the military might have my name, but it is a reasonable conclusion given the experiences, um, given the atrocities and abuses that my colleagues from the BSF and from the USU, the University Student Unions, are facing uh, inside the interrogation camps and the insane prison. So, um, uh, there are just some points that you cannot just keep the information and stand the torture. Uh, I totally understand that it is quite uh, a reasonable uh, things to things that you might have leak certain names or information if you are tortured or given trouble enough inside the interrogation camp. Also, we have this protocol if a member, an involved member of our circuit, uh, is arrested, uh, we move from like uh, the the safe houses, the the online domains that the that certain person who is arrested know in 2 days. It is just a rule of thumb that it is super safe to just assume that you are exposed. We were hiding. We thought was not safe enough. We were in Leiden, and in Leiden there were night battles. Uh, the thing we called like some sort of very small scale and low impact battles between the protest groups and the soldiers. Every night they were just protesting, and when the police and the military trucks came in, they disappeared, and they threw uh, the people, the soldiers, like cars around the street and shoot sound bombs, tear gas, and the people threw them back with Molotov cocktails. And where we were living was just a no escape flat. If the police show up at your doorstep, you're done. So we thought it would be a wise idea to uh, stay off the grid. So I eventually decided to flee to a liberated area, an area controlled by ethnic armed group. So I, in 2 weeks, I just left Yangon.
Right. And you had mentioned to me before our interview that before you reached this ethnic area that 9 of your close colleagues were unfortunately detained and arrested. Do you know anything about their condition and what and their status after being arrested?
Their conditions were so desperate and poor. Um, the the female members of the arrested group faced frequent sexual harassment, and the male members, they were beaten. They were hit so hard that they could not sleep on their back. They sleep on their chest because the back, there's so much pain on it, and their glasses were broken, and they were placed uh, inside the prison inside the prison cells together with criminals who really committed a crime, uh, major crimes. They had to spend. Uh, they had to share the cell with these people, and they were bullied, and the prison authorities didn't do anything about it. And we even believe that they intentionally uh, let them share with these criminals to be bullied, and they were forced to carry human waste, and and they were they had sleep deprivation, all the things. We learned from the reliable sources that we can trust 100%. Their situations, their conditions were so poor.
That's really tough. I'm sorry. That's must be really terrible for you to hear about your friends in these conditions and to feel so helpless to do anything to prevent the torture that they're enduring. Are those 9 all still in prison?
They are. They are.
Hmm. I'm really sorry. So while this was happening, you were able to escape. You had referenced earlier that military intelligence was actively searching for you as you were moving to different safe houses and eventually to ethnic areas. Can you share which ethnic area you ended up making it to?
Um, I went to the KNU controlled area. I actually, I had been to Karen State for only twice, and I didn't think my third visit would be to the liberated area. I met a lot of people, a lot of interesting people, and the CDM police, the CDM soldiers, and people like activists who are just like me, fleeing away from the arrest, and and people who were joining the armed struggle, and who were receiving training uh, for armed struggle. So I met with these people, and living conditions were not convenient. Uh, it is super inconvenient. Um, Sometimes you just don't eat. Sometimes you don't have anything to eat. Sometimes you just don't eat because you don't want to eat what you have, and the other conditions were also poor. We have very limited electricity, uh, but we were fortunate enough to be on the border with Thailand, and we can use the Thai SIM card. The facilities were arranged by the host, and and they are kind, and we take bath in the river. And my daily routine, I would say, I I I would wake up and have breakfast if there's anything left, and I would uh, walk about 10 minutes to get a soy milk. It is a luxury, and I would drink it together with my friend, and I will be back at my camp, and I would talk with people, and would have lunch, and have a nap, and uh, in the times that when the generator is on, we will try to uh, have a socket for our phones to charge, and it is not enough. If you run fast enough, you will find run one. So, and in the evening, you take baths, you wash your clothes in the river, and you change, and you have dinner, and find some drinks, and and it was the only entertainment or worldly pleasure that you can find in the camp. You can still drink, um, but you don't want to drink with so many people or strange people, because things can get messy. It is not good for the camp, for you, for the other people, and for the host. So you drink discreetly, and
Wow.
you call it a day. And at one night, this is my favorite story. I was stung by a scorpion 4 times subsequently. Yeah, I was just after my bath in the river, and I dried my pants on the wall, on the partition wall, and I didn't know that the scorpion was hiding in the pocket of my trouser, and I just put it on, and I was just stung again and again.
But you recovered.
Yeah, I was recovered. It wasn't venomous enough to trouble me for days.
How was the morale?
I would say that people were asking to themselves and to each others how what are the odds that we can win. People were uncertain, but still I would appreciate, and I would admit that I was surprised, at least contrary to my prior thoughts, when I found that people were strong enough that they were uncertain, but they were so determined that they were not given up. Uh, I think if one has the contest, one can get the difference between these two statements.
And so you stayed in this camp for about 2 months, is that right?
Yes, 2 months exactly.
And that's quite a long time, 2 months. So you really fit into a kind of routine and mode and relationships, and a sense of normalcy starts to sink in, I suppose.
Even apart from the most difficult days and events like the scorpion, or days like you have like very strange food that you try to eat but you can't, uh, uh, things became normal for me, and not in the sense that I was perfectly okay there, but in the sense that the lack of urban convenience meant less and less to me.
Right. Humans are definitely adaptable species, and whatever situation we find ourselves in, much better, much worse, we after a while we tend to just adapt and normalize that. While you were there during those 2 months, did you continue with strategizing or any activist involvements? I imagine that would be hard with the lack of internet and electricity. Or on the flip side, did you undergo any training or learn any new skills? What productively were you doing during those months?
Hmm. I wasn't doing any training. I was just walking out in the evenings together with my friends. But there was internet connection, pretty reliable and strong enough. But what is limited is electricity. So I can work, but only on my phone, not on my computer. Um, it it limits uh, certain things, but it is still workable, and I was still able to work. By work, I mean having meetings with my group members and representing my organization in uh, these forums and platforms of activist and civil society organizations uh, uh, founded to re-add the coup. And as a foreign relations officer, I was also able to talk with uh, people outside Myanmar, uh, government actors, and non-government ones like activists and academics.
Mm, right. And how were the relations between the Bamar students that you were with in that group and the Karen hosts?
Um, it is a quite a good question, and the answer is mixed. Uh, for the people who are just who just have who already have had connections and contacts, or at least who have already been involved in politics circles, life was not too hard when it comes to relationships with the host. But if you are just a student or who used to be a stranger to political activism before the coup, people like the CDM staff or people who just joined the armed struggle, they they didn't have much exposures with the host. The host also had some sort of arrangements that um, allows them to save people who seems to be in danger, but at the same time not to expose themselves too much, because there could be imposters or spies or simply people who talks and asks too much.
Right, right. And you mentioned there was some adjustment to the conditions, the food. Can you share a bit about the food? I imagine you were eating different styles of cooking and different things being cooked than you had before in urban centers. What were some of the things that you were served?
There are There was regularly meat in our meals, but only regularly enough. There were quite often irregular times that the supply vehicles uh, was delayed, and we just had some rice and some fried strange flowers, and I really had a hard time eating these, and also uh, there are certain periods in those 2 months where people just cook for all people, and we just eat from this. So if you were not like hungry in the early hours and decided to uh, wait, the food is gone. And there were also some exotic meats such as wild boars, uh, and and yeah, like things were just like sometimes we just got only rice, and we have to go to go a distance to find things at very little shops that we can eat with, like chips, or I don't know, some vegetables.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds difficult. And you referenced that you were there about 2 months exactly. What compelled your time to come to an end?
Ah, uh, I I have my friends who have applied a visa on my behalf or in their respective countries, and also there are friends I reach out and ask for to find ways to take me out, because the the liberated areas are not potentially safe areas. I was fortunately enough to have been brought to a relatively safe area in the uh, in the areas controlled by the same ethnic organizations. The others were bombed, and there were numerous encounters between the host forces and the military forces, and um, it was just a question of time, uh, like where when like we would be surprised by an air raid or a ground campaign, a military campaign. So um, one of the thing was the most promising, the lead, and also there I met an old friend, literally speaking, an old teacher in the camp, and we cooked together and we ate together, and we were just sharing spaces. So um, he came to have a connection uh, to made his way to Thailand, and um, I I tried my best to uh, make him like let me uh, tag along with his group, and I was successful, and I also made my way to Thailand exactly 2 months after I left Yangon, and after that, subsequently, my visa was successful, and I traveled to Germany.
So that's quite a journey over the last few months. I'm sure in late January you never thought that you would be going to the places that you did and having the experiences that you did. And thank goodness that you have managed to find yourself in a place of relative safety and comfort after everything that you've gone for. And that from the position that you're in, you're now able to play a role and support in ways that when you were closer to danger, you probably could not. And at this point going forward, what do you think it will take for the people to win?
It's a $1 million question. Um, sure, yes, and I think we need uh, stamina. We need energy, which could keep us running until the long run, or at least the medium run. And the other thing is a concerted and harmonious movement in the middle, and at the top tier, I would say uh, a well politically intended and effective uh, timely political leadership. I would say um, things at the bottom are working really well, and we need things at the top right. In my take, the political leadership today is not efficient and like in the form which it is supposed to take. So um, we need energy in the base level, and in the at the bottom level, and in the middle level we need concerted and a harmonious approach, and at the top level we need really decisive, timely, well-intended political leadership. It is very, I know, very conceptual and abstract, but it is the thing which is on my mind at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. For the last question I have, I just want to go back to what you talked about in the first couple minutes of this interview and your background, and you reference how your family's livelihood was running a shop that sold monks' requisites and robes and books on Buddhism. And so, through this family work, I'm sure that you came in contact with many monks and monasteries and supporters and that more religious side of society. And so, I'm wondering your thoughts on the monastic involvement in the current movement. Where do you see the monkhood falling? What do you see of their response? And what would you like to see going forward?
Hmm. Um, if we can say that a certain group had been trying to uh, take the monastic order out of the political leadership, political activism leadership roles historically in Myanmar, which is uh, led by monks and students. Um, I would say these people has been successful uh, in these transition years. Um it is now not a surprise anymore not to see monks in the leadership roles. but um, it it has it would have been a surprise uh, for a person in 1988 or 96 or especially the 2007 Saffron Revolution to hear uh, the current level of involvement of Buddhist monks in this protest. There are, of course, uh, quite a number of monks who participated in the protest at the front lines, and I have even studied a land about a monk who became a layman to join the armed struggles. These stories are moving, but as a whole, uh, the 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 monastic order, I would say, has given up its leadership role in this political movement.
Right. And so with the condition in mind that that by virtue of becoming a Buddhist monastic, there is a renunciate quality to that decision. There is a sense of leaving the world and of not being political. You know, one can debate what being political means, but certainly one takes on a different role in society through a monastic. So, knowing the duties and the vow and the responsibilities of what it means to ordain as a Buddhist monk and to follow that code that the Buddha set down, how do you see that monks can continue to follow their monastic vow and fulfill the Vinaya, the 227 rules that they must follow? How can they continue to do that while also playing a positive role in the movement?
Um, I I I I don't think I can give an analysis or expert view uh, on this. I was raised by a Buddhist family, and my family is close to monasteries. It is just that I must admit that I'm no expert, but there are there's I think still ways to like not to keep yourself silent towards the injustice while I mean, like, I think there are ways not to keep yourself silent towards the injustice without breaking the rules which must be observed uh, by the monks. Buddha even mediated a battle between two nations uh, once, and like in some sense, he got involved in politics. Uh, but now the reason uh, of the decline of Buddhist monks' involvement in political activism and their say uh, towards the injustice is not necessarily the strict observation of the laws, but success of uh, a campaign which used Buddhist nationalist sentiments against democracy, freedom of expressions, and multilateralism and international communities in the past 10 years.
Right. So then we come back to this issue of fake news and of trying to get the accurate information fitting in once again. And so in this response, or perhaps lack of response on the part of the Buddhist monkhood, how have the people been holding that? How have they been viewing them? Because, of course, in traditional Burmese Buddhist society, there is a certain level of deferring to monks and their those that are in robes, following a higher level of ethical and spiritual discipline. So in general, what has been the people's, and here I'm referring to the wider segment of traditional Burmese Buddhist society, not just the young activists that are in your crowd, but in terms of across the board among the people who have for so many years supported them and taken advice from them and shown respect and reverence to them. What response are you seeing among them for how the monkhood has been engaging or not engaging at present?
As far as I can observe, I don't see people like complaining the entire order, but they praise the monks that stand on the side of justice, and they renounce the monks who are not not necessarily who are not active, but who have been too silent for their position with these atrocities the military have been committing. I can say that it is true for a larger community of Burmese Buddhist people. Not all, but still not just a circle of modern educated youth.
Right. So this could be changing the nature of lay Sangha relationship going forward, however this plays out.
Indeed, I would say so. At least some of the most prominent Buddhist monks are in pressure and having social punishment because of their silence.
Right. Well, with this, I thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really informed interview, not just of ideas and of learning more about history and the movement through the academic studies you brought to it, but also in your own personal story. And I'm very relieved that you've been able to be in a place of safety and continuing on your work. I'm very sorrowful to know about those colleagues of yours that are still in detention. And I think I speak for all listeners with thoughts and prayers, metta, remembering them, caring for them, hoping for their safety. And I wish you the best of success, the movement as well. Thank you so much for the time that you've taken to be able to share in such depth of your experience over these last few months and your experiences as well over the previous years leading up to this.
My pleasure. I'm happy to talk on these matters, and it is my pleasure to be invited as a guest to this session.
As inspiring as it was to hear today's guest, I know from experience that when you're listening from so far away, there can also be a certain kind of helplessness in hearing about the struggle that people like them are now engaged in. Thankfully, we have organized a reliable way for interested listeners to provide valuable assistance to those local communities. All donations will be sent to support the protesters currently resisting the military coup. By taking an active role in helping support the movement, you can ensure that people like today's speaker have even a few more resources to draw on and can manage even another week more in their efforts. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are resisting the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Every cent goes immediately and directly to funding those local communities who need it most. Donations go to support such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, and the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies. Or if you prefer, you can earmark your donation to go directly to the guest you just heard on today's show. In order to facilitate this donation work, we have registered a new nonprofit called Better Burma for this express purpose. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is now directed to this fund. Alternatively, you can visit our new Better Burma website, which is betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause, and both websites accept credit cards. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to those respective accounts, or email us at info@betterburma.org. In all cases, that's Better Burma, one word, spelled BetterBurma. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. Thank you so much for your kind consideration. You've been listening to the Insight Myanmar podcast. We'd appreciate it very much if you could rate, review, and/or share this podcast. Every little bit of feedback helps. You can also subscribe to the Insight Myanmar podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. If you can't find our feed on your podcast player, please just let us know and we'll ensure it can be offered there in the future. Also, make sure to check out our website for a list of our complete episodes, including additional text, videos, and other information available at insightmyanmar.org. And I also invite you to take a look at our new nonprofit organization at betterburma.org. There was certainly a lot to talk about in this episode, and we'd like to encourage listeners to keep the discussion going. Make a post, request specific questions, and join in on discussions currently going on the Insight Myanmar podcast Facebook group. You're also most welcome to follow our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts by the same name. If you're not on social media, feel free to message us directly at info@insightmyanmar.org. Or if you'd like to start up a discussion group on another platform, let us know, and we can share that forum here. Finally, we're open to suggestions about guests or topics for future episodes. So if you have someone or something in mind, please do be in touch. We would like to take this time to thank everyone who made this podcast possible. Currently, our team consists of 2 sound engineers, Mike Bink and Martin Combs. There's of course Zach Hessler, content collaborator and part-time co-host. Ken Pransky helps with editing, and a special Mongolian volunteer who is asked to remain anonymous does our social media templates. In light of the ongoing crisis in Myanmar, a number of volunteers have stepped in to lend a hand as well, and so we'd like to take this time to appreciate their effort in our time of need. And we're always on the lookout for more volunteers during this critical time, so if you'd like to contribute, definitely let us know. We'd also like to thank everyone who has assisted us in arranging for the guests we've interviewed so far. And of course, we send a big thank you to the guests themselves for agreeing to come on and share such personal, powerful stories. Finally, we're immensely grateful for the donors who made this entire thing possible. We want to remind our listeners that the opinions expressed by our guests are their own and don't necessarily reflect the host or other podcast contributors. Please also note that as we are mainly a volunteer team, we do not have the capacity to fact-check our guest interviews. By virtue of being invited on our show, there's a trust that they will be truthful and not misrepresent themselves or others. If you have any concerns about the statements made on this or other shows, please contact us. This recording is the exclusive right of Insight Myanmar podcast and may not be used without the expressed written permission of the podcast owner. which includes video, audio, written transcripts, or excerpts of any episodes. Also not meant to be used for commercial purposes. On the other hand, we're very open to collaboration. So if you have a particular idea in mind for sharing any of our podcasts or podcast-related information, please feel free to contact us with your proposal. If you would like to support our mission, we welcome your contribution. During this time of crisis, all donations now go towards supporting the protest movement in Myanmar through our new nonprofit, Better Burma. You may give by searching Better Burma on PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, GoFundMe, and Patreon, as well as via credit card at betterburma.org/donation. You can also give right on our Insight Myanmar website, as all donations given there are directed towards the same fund. And with that, we're off to work on the next show, so see you next episode.
Hãy subscribe cho kênh Ghiền Mì Gõ để không bỏ lỡ